Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the PCA HCCN Professional Development Series. I'm Suzanne Spear, and I'm delighted to be here with you guys today. It's been a minute. It feels like it's been much longer than just a month since we were last together. But anyway, glad you guys are here and joining us today. And today we're going to be talking about designing workforce TTA for health centers. We are switching gears a little bit from what we originally attended, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm super excited about the content today, and I hope you guys will find it useful as well. So as I mentioned, I'm Suzanne Spear. I'm the Director of Workforce Development here at HCU. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, I'm pretty sure you guys are, but for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a national nonprofit focused on the recruitment and retention of a transdisciplinary workforce to help solve the access to care issue. And we have a national cooperative agreement, or rather, should I say, we are a national cooperative agreement holder through the Bureau of Primary Health Care. And our NCA is called the STAR Center, which stands for Solutions, Training, and Assistance for Recruitment and Retention. And if you haven't been to our website recently, we encourage you guys to go. I know that I say that every time we're together, but truly things are always being added, especially during this time of COVID-19. We're adding resources and trainings there. So go ahead and check it out and see what's new when you get a few minutes. And again, I'm Suzanne, and I think that's the third time I've said that, so y'all, I'm not going to say it again. And I am joined by Mariah Blake and Sabrina Edgington. They aren't on camera today, but yes, they are here. So if you have any issues or need anything during this hour that we're together, feel free to either send something in the chat through the questions box, or even email Mariah at mblake@clinicians.org, and she can help you get pointed in the right direction. Just to review, the goals of this series are to really, first and foremost, help build your workforce expertise. A lot of you wear many different hats, and workforce is just one of them. So this is really here to help build your workforce expertise, as well as hear some insight from other PCAs, NCAs, and HCCNs. And finally, really to connect you with others. This is a safe space, if you will, to really chat and hear from your colleagues that are really rowing in the same boat of life and work as the rest of us. Oops. Sorry, you guys, my slides aren't advancing. Just a few webinar housekeeping items, as we always do here. We are recording, and we will be sending this recording out later to all of our registered attendees. And as I mentioned, feel free to ask questions as we go along the way. We have both a chat and also a Q&A box, and Mariah and Sabrina are going to be monitoring those and interacting with you on those platforms as we go along. And so feel free to, put anything in there, whether it's a question or a comment, or really anything that you, need to add or have a question. Those are the platforms that you can do it in. And then we are going to be having a session evaluation at the end of this. So stay on at the end. We're going to leave this open after the presentation and after we finish, and it's going to flash up. And just to do a quick evaluation, we really value your feedback, and we would love to hear from you and what you loved and what you think we can improve on next time. And finally, sit back, relax, have some fun, and enjoy the next hour or so that you're with us. Okay, as I mentioned, chat and questions, we've already went over that. Before we get started with our content today, I just wanted to do a check-in. I know we're in a really strange place with COVID-19, and a lot of things are happening and things are rapidly changing. Our focus has changed from normal everyday operations to really go mode with everything COVID-19. So I just wanted to do a quick check. How are you guys? Is there anything that we can do for you? Anything that you want to ask your colleagues? Any comments that you have. We just wanted to provide about 10 minutes for you guys to, talk to everybody, hear what others are doing, ask us questions. We just really wanted a space, since we're all together here today, just wanted to provide a space for you guys to do that. If you're going to put it in chat and you want everybody to see it, make sure you select in the two to do all panelists and all attendees. So what's going on? How are you guys? How's everybody doing? I hope everybody's staying healthy there during this time. I know we're all managing a lot. Most of us are working from home. And I know I was joking today that, I needed to make sure my door was locked so my tiniest coworkers didn't come in. Yeah, so how's everybody doing? Great. So we had somebody come in the chat that said, trying to determine how to repurpose staff to keep more folks working. That is a great one. So, and that brings me to some of the resources that we have around COVID-19. So we have done 2 webinars this week around staffing. And I want you guys to, we have our link, I believe Mariah can correct me if I'm wrong. The recording from our webinar on Tuesday for general workforce staffing is on our website. And then yesterday we conducted a webinar in conjunction with NOAA in regards to specific dental staffing redeployment. So, and that's going to be up there very soon. So check that out. We'll, if there's something that, a follow-up, that we have from that, let me know, but we do have those available for you. Yeah, so Mandy from Bi-State said that recruitment activities are pretty much on a back burner for most of the health centers in her state. Anybody else in the same place? I know that our focus as the workforce NCA and everything recruitment and retention has sort of come to a screeching halt, and we're really having to shift gears completely. People are now asking us, instead of resources on recruitment and retention, they're asking us about information on furloughing. And so we're really having to figure that out and find those resources. So Mandy, I know we are, with that recruitment activities. I know you guys do direct recruitment there at Bi-State. And I think we probably have some friends on there that are, doing that as well. So a yes for us, from a support standpoint, but I would love any of our other friends who do direct recruitment to answer that as well. Yes, Wayne, we are still adjusting to our new normal as well, and I think pretty much everyone else is. It's week 5 for us being at home, or at least my children being home from school, and it feels like forever and yesterday all at the same time. Trying to maintain morale, that's another big one. So employee engagement is vitally important during this time, and I believe we have some employee engagement resources on our website, so check those out. And it's something that, check-ins, communication, all that kind of good stuff, super important during this time. And so if that's something that you would like to share with your health centers, feel free to do so as well. Oh, great. I love this question. This person asked, we know that most of my work, as Suzanne Spear, is remote. What tips do you have for remote work for those of us who are new to it? Great question. So first and foremost, I would say get up every day, take a shower, and put on real clothes. It doesn't have to be your normal work clothes that you dress in if you were going into the office or whatever, but just put on some jeans and a t-shirt. Basically, something you didn't sleep in. And, try to even, try to start work at the same time as you normally do at the office. And, take a lunch break. And, try to really try not to work after hours. I am the first to tell you that I do that often, but try not for it to be your normal. Try to get everything you need to get done during your normal working hours. And that's not to say that I know, especially if you have children, you're having to tend to them. and help them with schoolwork and stuff like that. But try to get most everything that you can done during your normal working hours. And also, if you can, dedicate a space, even if it's just in your bedroom, a corner that is your working space. Those are the biggest tips I would say. And but at the same time, realize that we're in extraordinary circumstances, and so give yourself some grace and really try to know that you're not going to be able to do everything in the exact same way. Especially, it's not just that you're home, but it's like, especially if you have other people that live with you at your house, there are going to be distractions that you're not used to. Even me, and I have a dedicated space here at my house that hasn't changed. But yet, my kids come in sometimes. Obviously, I tell them when I have calls and things like that, but they'll come in, and and so even though I'm still adjusting to that. But the main thing is just try to have a dedicated space, get up, get going every day, and try to have some space in between work and home if you can on time. Okay. Mandy was on the NOAA webinar yesterday, and she said it was great. It really, Mandy, it was. I was so grateful that all those people were on it and were able to tune in. So if your health centers are wondering how to redeploy their dental staff, or even what they're doing around furloughing, go ahead and listen to that. That's awesome. And then Mariah put the recording from our webinar in the chat. Thank you very much. And then again, we will have the recording for the NOAA one on our website soon. So Shannon from Colorado said that they're putting recruitment on the back burner in Colorado. Absolutely. Behavioral health. So Michelle Peterson said the exception to recruitment seems to be behavioral health. The demand is strong. Absolutely. We're all going through trauma, even if it's not a violent trauma situation, or hopefully it's not a violent trauma situation. We're all going through a traumatic situation. So yes, absolutely. Okay. So Ashley Caldwell, Texas is experiencing a similar situation with recruitment as well. Ashley Caldwell in Illinois, and you guys are probably reading this too, but I just want to make sure that for those of you who aren't seeing it, that you can hear it. Trying to get tested expanded to FQHCs, and that you have quite a few candidates reaching out. That's great news, especially for as we go along and testing, COVID-19 testing gets expanded, and all of that. It's important that we are able to stay staffed. Okay, so Shalana Bell from Michigan said that she's beginning to communicate with health centers on how to start the conversation, are rebuilding workforce post-COVID-19. Absolutely, yes. We need to be thinking about it, and we need to have as much as humanly possible, have that as our goal on the inside. So anybody who has any advice for her, I would love for you to share that in the chat. Okay, so the question on direct recruitment, Katie said she missed it. So the question was just that Mandy felt like it was being put on a back burner in her state, and that was wondering if other folks were experiencing that as well. So, okay. Yeah, so Judd shared that in a few weeks or months, we're going to start calling back furloughed or laid off staff. And we need to get ahead and be prepared to help our CHCs with that. We know what's going to happen, and we need to be ready. Absolutely. Like I said, I know sometimes it's hard to see the forest through the trees, but we definitely need to be thinking about that as we sort of start to, come out of crisis mode of, and immediate changes, and then sort of just think about, longer term, how do we get those people back in there? And Shannon from Colorado mentioned that we're updating the topics for an event we had planned pre-COVID to include topics on rebuilding the workforce post-COVID, and that's great. Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm never going to be able to get to all these. So, so what we'll do is we will download the chat, and I'll make sure that we get that out to everybody. And any questions that we have, we can figure out a way to either interact, interact through email or, through IWS, or if you guys really want it, we also do have discussion board on our website. So let's keep this conversation going. I definitely want to keep going with our content today and give our speaker plenty of time to get the content that he would like to present, and he is here to present for. But let's keep the conversation going. I know that we're all in this together, and we're in a specific. We really have a specific, goal in mind, and that is workforce. So let's keep this conversation going, and let's be here for one another. And you guys are such a great group of people. And like I said, we'll get all the chat out to you guys, and then we'll see what we can't do about continuing this conversation as we go along. Okay. Someone mentioned that they were shifting their content, from pre-COVID-19 to post-COVID-19, and things that they were doing now are different than what they had planned. Well, that is something that is happening here today. So today we were going to have NACHC on talking about content for training for health center leaders. Well, we decided to shift a little bit. And instead of having the specific content for health center leaders, we thought it would be a great idea to have someone from NACHC come on and talk about designing great training and TA. This could be for health center leaders. This could be really for anybody. But instead of, again, the content, how to put a great training together. So I'm excited to say that we have Ed Schelb on the line with us today. And I'm skipping down from this, but that's okay. With us today. And he is the specialist in learning and instructional design at NACHC. It is my pleasure. I've just gotten to know him as we've been doing this, and I hope you'll be excited to hear what he has to say. But he is going to really take us through the steps to creating a great presentation, and I'm really excited for him to share with you what he has to say. So anyway, welcome, Ed. Thank you so much for being here, and we're excited to get started with you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to the community about instructional design. I am an instructional designer and learning specialist at the National Association of Community Health Centers. I've been there for about 1.5 years. Before then, I was in academia. I had a prior career as an English professor. I often describe myself as a refugee from English departments. And then I gravitated to instructional design. Worked in the community college environment for quite a number of years, and then came over to NACHC. And since I've been there, I've been working with my colleagues to really focus on learning events and how we can build them better. We are, of course, like everybody else, now engaged in translating them to a virtual environment. And so part of what I'm going to present here are basic instructional design ideas that are based on empirical results, right? So I'm not going to be heavily into science or brain science or any of those things, but some of the recommendations that I'm going to make to you are all really sort of grounded in empirical studies about how people learn. And so I only have 35 minutes. So what I'm going to try to do is go through a kind of top 10 list for improving your presentations. So here we go. Oh, sorry. Let me get back to.
Yeah, bottom right hand of the screen. Can you see it, Ed?
Yeah, so hold on.
Sorry, I don't want to touch it because I don't want to take it away from you again.
So where is the, I'm trying to look at the presenter view here. Okay, I have to just, sorry, my fault.
No. There you go.
There we go.
Perfect.
Sorry, clumsy fingers here.
No worries.
So this is an image I put together in a quote that really kind of emphasizes what I think needs to happen in terms of designing good training. And the quote is, "Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away." That's from the author of The Little Prince. And I think this is true. One of the things that I've experienced quite a lot when I go to presentations, I will see that the ambitions are too grand, right? That the slides are too packed with information. The scope of the training is so extensive, it would be impossible to realize in a graduate school curriculum over a year. I mean, it's really kind of remarkable. So I think that part of what I want to emphasize today is simplicity. It's chunking content, and sorry, these are instructional design kind of buzzwords, but really sort of making your presentations fit into a package that really meets the attention span of your audience, to focus on the learner rather than the presenter. And I think that one of the major critiques of presentations in general are that they're still based upon a lecture model that has existed since the 10th century and hasn't really deviated very much. So someone comes online and then starts to talk and to share their wisdom, and the audience is passive and is kind of a simplistic model that the subject matter expert is like pouring content, right, sort of into people's heads, and the more they pour, the better off the presentation is. Well, I think that that's a huge problem, and so my goals are to get you to think a little bit like an instructional designer and think about ways in which you can structure your presentations, design them in such a way as to be more participatory and more effective. So I will have a couple of instances where I'd like you to respond. We'll use the chat. We will try to make this a little bit participatory, although 35 minutes is not a whole lot of time to really get down and dirty with practical design, but we're going to try. So my first foray here is to talk about practice, but before then I really want to start with a story. And the story is from Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, and there is a plague of forgetting in the book, right? Where people start to lose their memory of what an object is. So in response, they start putting little pieces of paper, right, identifying a tea kettle or a table or whatever, and then they have to start then sort of writing notes to say, well, what something does, and then they have to start writing notes about what the notes about the things, right, actually are for. So I mean, it's a kind of a comic version of the notion of forgetting. And what I want to introduce to you is that we are in a space of forgetting and not memory when we are presenting information. So have any of you heard about the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve? If you haven't, and you could chat online, right? If you guys know this, but it's basically an idea that within one day that people will forget 75% of the new things that they've learned. Within 1 week, it's nearly 0%. So, so what we need to do is think about, right, so how do we structure a presentation in a learning event, right, that is not prey to this massive forgetting structure, right? So, and there are some ways in which to combat that. But in general, if you do a traditional lecture with, in fact, slides that look like this, that have too much content, and just kind of breeze through without any opportunity to practice, you will be at the 0% almost inevitably in terms of impact, right? People will not remember what the presentation was about. So the first thing I want to introduce here is the notion of practice. And most presentations, I think, right, are really premised on the idea that people are going to remember, right, what you have presented. And this is an illustration of Bloom's taxonomy. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. I'm going to type it in the chat box. This is a tool that instructional designers and academics use to start thinking about how people will practice, right, the knowledge, and how do you, that you're imparting, and how do you structure your instruction in order to get the right sorts of actions. So one of the great things about instructional design, in my personal experience, was when I went to my first job as an instructional designer, and they insisted that the only thing, right, that you are interested in as an instructional designer is what you have people do with the knowledge. And it's the do part that I think is so crucial here. So as you see that we have a whole hierarchy of action verbs, right, that describe levels of engagement with material. And so it goes from remember, which is, you remember a concept. You can define a term. You can summarize a paragraph. You can discuss, and it goes all the way to create. And so this is a very helpful tool in order to think about where you pitch, right, your practice activities. What do you want people to do in your session? And I think people are really sort of wanting to do things, right, in these sessions, but usually what happens is that we structure the event in order that they don't really do anything. The instructor talks and they provide concepts and materials and information and everything, but there is no actual doing. So when you start thinking about ways in which you can improve your presentations and your training events, the first thing you should really think about, right, so is getting people involved in the actual activity. You need practice, and practice is what reinforces, right, the learning. So you will combat the whole Ebbinghaus memory curve, right, forgetting curve, right, by actually sort of grounding it in real experience. So here begins my top 10 list. And the first one was, if I could, let me go back here. First one is unburden your slides of text. So one of the real problems, I think, with a lot of training material is that it's just so full of text and ideas that are jam-packed into your slide, right, into the space of the slide. It is the absolute antithesis of the Zen garden idea, right, where you have stones placed very strategically in lots of empty space. So there are a couple of things to think about in terms of how much text you can put on the slide. The first one is based upon short-term memory. The mind can only retain in short-term memory 5 bytes of information, right? You know, sort of give or take 2, plus or minus 2, which means that if you have an entire slide deck filled with text, people cannot process that. They can't latch on to the 5, right, sort of things that are really important. And plus you're dividing people's attention. So when you put a big slide, a slide full of text, right, on the screen, you're dividing people's attention because they're too busy reading the text and not listening to you, or too busy listening to you and not reading the text. And so people's attention is split. So that's my first recommendation, right? You know, sort of is to take your slide decks and radically reduce them. If you can get away from words altogether and do illustrations or images, right, you're going to be far better off, because the mind processes images and text in different parts of the brain, right? You know, so you can do that simultaneously. Okay, so let me go to my next point, and this is going to be actually an example. Y'all can see this. So this is an example of a slide that is just full of text, right? So what I want to ask you here, and please sort of use the chat box to make your comments. How effective do you think that having this much information on a text is going to be for your readers? How readily do you think that they are going to be able to process all this information? All right, let's see. Thank you. So we have, it needs to be a handout. That is a fantastic observation. And we're gonna get back to that and elaborate on it. But so they're just busy looking at it. Send it beforehand. They will focus on the amount of words, not the content. Yes, that is fantastic, because a slide presentation, right? You know, sort of is a presentation. It is not a book. It's not a manual, right? You know, sort of you can be more effective and give the kind of detailed information in a handout, right? In a downloadable, and any other ways to send out. So a presentation is really not the place to have this kind of compact detail. The second question would be, how realistic, and this is just one part of this presentation. Apparently this is only part 2 of a 5-part presentation. So my question to you would be, how realistic it is to show this and then have this as a plan to get through in an hour-and-a-half presentation even. Is it possible? Well, so it's not possible, right? You know, sort of, and one of the things that I want to emphasize throughout, right, you really got to figure out the scope of your presentation and what do you really want to focus on. A big topic like project management, right? People get graduate degrees, right, in project management, and you are not going to be able, right, you know, sort of to train people on how to be project managers in the space of 50 minutes or an hour and a half. So if you wanted to deal with project management, you have to really focus on a particular problem within project management. So we'll get to that. All right, so my next tip, right? Yes, perfect. Yeah, so we're getting a lot of comments in the chat box, right? If broken down in chunks, depending on the level of attendees and their grasp of concepts. Okay, so that's exactly right. You know, sort of what you need to do as an instructional designer is also determine the level of your audience, right? What they already know. And then what are the, and we'll get to this in a minute, what are their problems, right? Why are you engaged in this learning activity? What are you trying to solve, right? So that's exactly what I'm trying to drive home here, is that you really have to define your audience and, right, define the particular things that you want to focus on. So the next one is also sort of getting to visual presentation. One of the most effective ways to teach people is to use simplified illustrations, right? The surest way, on the other hand, to make people unable to process, right, information, is to use complex illustrations that are particularly not legible. And I don't know how many of you have experienced presentations where people put up an entire spreadsheet, right? You can't read it. It's just there. It's an image of a spreadsheet. And then they don't really sort of engage in sort of breaking it down, right? So images are great. Illustrations are one of the best ways to convey knowledge, and also to situate people in the learning process. So one thing that I think is hugely effective is to map out a process, right? And then move through that process and then clearly articulate where people are and how one step of a process leads to the other. So that, to me, right, it gets to the design element, right? So how do you sort of put together, right, a presentation? What is the overarching story you want to tell? I mean, we're going to get to that idea of story in 1 second. So, all right. So the next idea is the idea of a worked example. So science has told us that people learn by examples, by working out problems. And a worked example is simply, right, you take a math problem as an instructor and you show people how to do it. And then based upon, right, all the principles that you want them to understand and apply. And then the second phase would be then take a new example and have people walk through it. So it's a kind of problem-based model of learning, right? You show people how to do something and then they imitate, right, sort of how you want them to do it, right, on their own, and make their own judgments and make their own analyses, right? So this is a way to think about offering people the chance to explore on their own, right, to practice what you are trying to instruct them on, right, and then be able to have the autonomy, right, so the experience to take that back and apply it, right? So again, what we're looking at here is this notion that really, if you want to teach people something, you have to give them opportunities to practice. You have to show them how to do something with best practices, and then let them explore and let them try to solve the problem of their own. So that's a fundamental idea in user-centered design, right? So that you really give people the opportunity to apply knowledge, right, rather than just remember key concepts or terms. All right. So number 7 is telling a story. And that may seem kind of an odd thing to say, or at least the relic of a English professor, right? Who's read lots of stories and is involved with narrative. But what a story does, of course, is it has a beginning, a middle, and an end if you're a traditional storyteller. So you are progressing, right, through a journey to an endpoint. And so one of the things that I think is really problematic in lots of presentations is the fact that it's sort of, here's one thing, here's another, here's one more thing, right? And then finally, here's this thing. And it doesn't culminate in anything. It doesn't advance, right? It's not built one thing upon the other. So let me ask you in the chat, could you provide some examples of how you think about sequencing stuff? What story are you trying to tell in your training programs? And I'll give you an example, right? Sort of the hero's journey is a common archetype, right? Sort of for people doing presentations. So you start out, as a young man, and then you go through a number of different obstacles, and then you overcome those obstacles, right, to get where you are today. So it's like this journey, right? So we are trying to, you're trying to, sort of self-realize, right? So are there any stories that you tell, right, in your own sort of training? All right, well, we're not getting too much buzz on that one on the chat room. Let me put it another way. So if you need to know where you want your training to go in order to build your training. So what's the end point that you want learners to achieve, and then you build backwards. So do you want them to be great interviewers, right? So do you want them to be able to use particular kinds of interviewing techniques, right? What are the obstacles, right, to realizing, right, so that that kind of goal, right? So a lot of instructional design is based upon that idea, right? So what do you want people to be at the end of the training, or when they go back to the workforce, right? We have trainees could be being distracted could be an obstacle. Yeah, absolutely, right? Anything else? So Mondi says, I've provided examples of lessons learned in presentations, not so much a story though. So let me suggest that if you haven't thought about stories, you consider it. So let's imagine that you want to train people on effective help desk sort of procedures or techniques, right? So you really want your help desk to improve, right? So your story might be, right, so taking people through a typical day, right, sort of or a typical transaction, right, at the help desk, and then sort of breaking it down, right, into obstacles, right? So what are the problems involved in this part of the transaction, right? And then trace the whole process from beginning to end. So when I'm talking about story, all I'm saying is that I think that people need to think about progress, right? So they think about top to bottom metaphors, right? So you go from the bottom to the top, you go from the right to the left, you go from beginning to middle to end. I skipped a slide, but it's basically on simplifying, right? So the next thing is really talking about chunking, which we were introduced to in the chat, right? It broken down in chunks, and depending on the level of attendees and their grasp of concepts. So one of the things that I think that we need to really sort of think clearly about is how much is too much. So I pulled a topic from a presentation that someone gave at one of our conferences. And the topic is up here: constructing and operationalizing your organizational data strategy for networks and health centers. You have 1 hour to train on this topic. So my first question is it possible to teach someone to construct and operationalize a data strategy in a 1 hour session? And I should add, why not? We have one resounding no so far. No, it's not possible. Way too much content and learning for 1 hour. Too much detail. And then what can learners reasonably practice in a 1 hour session on this topic? Well, let's not get to that question right now. And let me just ask you, if you had this as your topic, what might your revised topic be? Can you imagine, sort of breaking this down into smaller chunks and then focusing on a small bit? Or is this just way too much? Make it a series. Thank you. That's perfect, right? So if you are doing it as a series, right, sort of, it would be what? You would start and you would try to determine what is the first step, right, in this story that you're going to tell. So in any case, right, sort of, so that's the idea, right? Make it a series. Here's an example of how you might revise this topic. So again, when you chunk content, you want content that's 10 to 15 minutes long, right, with some practice activities. So as Gerard pointed out, I'm probably sort of going over my time, but let me just suggest here, right, sort of that if you revise the topic to construct your organizational strategy for your health center, you might chunk it into smaller pieces like this, and then you can start to think about what you can do. How can you practice? So in terms of number one, so analyze your current data operations and conduct a SWOT analysis. Would that be sufficient? Could that be the focus of your presentation? Do people know how to do a SWOT analysis? Does your audience really sort of have the skills? Can you take them through in a 1 hour session how to do a SWOT analysis about their data operations? So the idea here, right, is that we have a very small chunk of this bigger picture that we are trying to now sort of formulate as a training program. Okay. My next point is, okay, so what do you focus on? So if you have this big, huge sort of idea that you want to train on, right? And you don't have enough time to do that training, then where do you go? How do you figure out what to train on and what to not train on. Well, number 4 that I have is you have to determine what the pain points are. You have to know what the common practices are, right? You know, so why people do things badly, and the preconceptions, right, that they have about best practices. So if I were going to sort of take that idea of the big data center model, right, I would say, okay, let's take a small portion of that and figure out what is difficult, right, about that task. And can we organize our materials adequately? So somebody said, I provided the top 10 components of data strategy in a 1-hour webinar, just as you're doing on a different topic. Each component could have a set of backup tools or trainings. Yeah, no, precisely. Thank you, Lisa, for that. So the idea is, yeah, so you can do these general introductions, and I think that this is also a model that I'm using, right? You know, so there's a lot of material out there. This is a introduction, right? You know, so that you can then provide supplementary materials, right, to really sort of drive home your point and do adequate training. Okay, so number 3. So encourage learners to share how they think and act in a real context, provide mentoring feedback during practice activities, and demonstrate clearly why learners want to think or act differently. And that's called the WIFM in e-learning jargon, the what's in it for me. So if I could suggest, right, you know, sort of that if you can embed, right, what you're teaching in a real context through a simulation, through a problem-based scenario, and make it as realistic as possible, and choose scenarios that don't have an easy answer, that force people to think through problems, to analyze situations, to exercise best practices, that will enliven your training and make the context more apparent, and the transfer of the knowledge to their work context easier. So when I think of change, thought, and behavior, it's all about, you know, sort of thinking through what people do, right, why they do it, and how we can sort of adjust their behavior, right, you know, sort of in a real-time situation. When I say provide mentoring feedback during practice activities, what I'm suggesting is, instead of pontificating, right, you know, sort of as a lecturer, if you give people thought problems, if you give them scenarios to solve, you step back as a presenter and then allow them, right, you know, sort of to express their own ideas, then you can come in then and provide feedback that is constructive. And that's a really more effective way of engaging with your audience. Okay, I know I have less than a minute to go here. So obviously, sort of the top 10 is too much for my scope here. So I'm not entirely being able to get through what I wanted. But so the other thing I want to emphasize is you ask strategic questions. And this comes from an academic background, which all my academic teaching was Socratic. It was asking people questions. It was never providing information. I think that there's a lack of that in a lot of trainings, and that if you could incorporate those standard academic practices and get people to elaborate. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. So if you get people to elaborate, right, you know, so you can do a lot better job of eliciting responses and getting people more actively involved. And so here we go. Number 1. So I just want to reemphasize that if you rethink the lecture format and offer problem-based learning, thought problems, simulations, and sharing experiences and best practices, that you'll be more effective in your training programs. You can also use blended learning models, as people have suggested before, right? So you can make materials available offline. You can set up blended models where part of it's online, part of it's self-study. So you don't have to limit yourself in thinking about teaching about any topic, right, in the space of the 1 hour, right? You can expand and really sort of be more inclusive in your training approach. Whew. Okay, well, thank you. I'm gonna sign off now. My time is up. If you want to contact me, ask me questions. I have some resources that I would love to share with you as well. Sort of on problem-based learning and other sort of activities. Please contact me at eSchelb@NACHC.com. So I'll turn it back over to Suzanne. Thank you.
Great. Ed, thank you so much. So much amazing content. And we're really grateful to you and also Gerard for coordinating all of this. Gerard Jolly coordinated getting Ed on with us today, and we really appreciate both of their efforts and all of the information and education that he imparted with you guys today. If you haven't already received the slides, you should have received them ahead of this. For some reason, if you didn't, certainly let me know. I know that was a lot to take in during the 35 minutes. So, feel free to, let us know what you need. So moving forward in our last couple of minutes together, let us know what you guys need. I know that I talked about sending out the chat, and we will do that just so you guys know about what, what everybody else has going on. And I think IWS has something else planned to just do some peer sharing and peer connection during this time. So definitely connect with each other via email and also that IWS platform. And stay tuned for the information about our next meeting, which is a virtual face-to-face in May. And that's going to be May 18th from 1 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern. So stay tuned for some more information on that. And I just wanted to share something with you guys, for you guys to share. We have a State Interviews Learning Collaborative coming up. We are going to be having Dick Finnegan, who is known, he's just like world renowned actually, when it comes to state interviews. And he is going to be with us as faculty leading a learning collaborative on state interviews. So this is just for health center staff this time, but we would love for you to share this with your health centers that are able to join. The information is on our website, and Mariah hopefully can get it in the chat if she has a chance. Thank you so much, Mariah. And she will be getting that. And if you guys could send that to your health centers, that would be amazing. So again, our next session, is our virtual face-to-face. We're going to be sending out all kinds of information on that, so stay tuned. I'm really excited about that. We'll open that up so everybody can be on the screen, and we'll be able to see everybody and hear everybody, and just spend some time together. So I'm really excited about that. As we are finishing here, feel free to stay in touch with us. Mariah's going to launch our poll, or excuse me, our evaluation rather, as it looks like a poll. Oops, sorry guys. So fill out the evaluation. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you again to Ed from NAC, and also Gerard. We really appreciate all your help. And thanks everybody for joining us today. I know we have a lot going on, and we're juggling a lot of different things during this time, but really appreciate you guys being on with us. So fill out the evaluation, stay in touch with us, and we will talk to you very soon. So thanks everybody. Take care.